Daniel Ricciardo is going back to where it all began. No, not HRT, he's rejoining Red Bull. The outgoing McLaren driver has decided he'd rather spend next year being wheeled out for Red Bull marketing stunts than racing in F1 for a team like Haas. There's more to Ricciardo's move than just some good PR though. Red Bull's been quick to play down the prospect of Ricciardo being an option for a race seat, but we know Ricciardo only wanted to do a deal that helps him get back onto the grid for 2024. That means there's loads to get into here, so make sure you comment, like and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to be made aware of our future videos, as we'll have plenty for you to keep watching during the F1 off-season. Ricciardo is set to be announced in an off-track role with Red Bull as a glorified third or reserve driver. Red Bull Motorsports advisor Helmut Marko jumped to the gun when he confirmed Ricciardo would be back with the team as its reserve in 2023 before a contract had actually been signed. But we understand that by the time the paddock packed away on Sunday evening in Abu Dhabi, the deal had been closed and an official announcement is imminent. Ricciardo's future has been the subject of much speculation since he agreed to end his McLaren F1 contract a year early to make way for Alpine reserve Oscar Piastri. He refused to entertain race seats at lower midfield teams such as Haas or Williams for 2023, preferring to take a sabbatical from racing in order to recover from a difficult and at times demoralising stint with McLaren, and he wants to target a return to a top team. Lewis Hamilton said Ricciardo was too good to be an F1 reserve driver, but that's what the 8-time Grand Prix winner has decided is best for him, sort of. Ricciardo is believed to have had some discussions with Mercedes, but settled on a return to the team that gave him his big break in F1 in 2014 and propelled him to 7 of those 8 victories, plus 2 top 3 finishes in the World Championship in 2014 and 16. Ricciardo won't be your average reserve driver being dragged around the world and attending the majority of races for no reward. Red Bull Juniors Liam Lawson and Dennis Hauger will be doing a lot of the donkey work. As we understand, Ricciardo will be at 7, maximum 8 races next year, primarily in North America, but at other major events as well. It'll be a surprise, for example, if he doesn't turn up on home soil in Australia. Beyond that, expect Red Bull to trot Ricciardo out at various promotional events and put him behind the wheel of some show cars. It won't all be superficial stuff like that though. Ricciardo's set to conduct simulator work for Red Bull, so he's prepared to drive should the team actually need to call on him, and he might even get to drive a car as well. Whether Red Bull would sacrifice any ultra-rare in-season test days like the Pirelli tests remains to be seen, but it's also an option for the team to give Ricciardo some running in a 2021 car if it wanted to seriously evaluate a driver whose reputation has taken a beating over the last couple of years. Ricciardo returning to Red Bull might make little sense for both parties on the surface. Even in a specific role, to borrow the word Red Bull team boss Christian Horner used to describe Ricciardo's contract, why is Red Bull interested in a driver that walked away 4 years ago? And why does Ricciardo want to be back with that team instead of guaranteeing he stays on the grid, given there was at least preliminary interest from Haas? Let's start with Red Bull, which believes Ricciardo's McLaren form could just be an aberration. Ricciardo's struggles at McLaren have mystified many people in the paddock, including Horner. Several times this season, the Red Bull boss has observed how strange he thinks it is. Back in Belgium, when Ricciardo's early McLaren exit had been announced, Horner said F1 was not seeing the real Daniel Ricciardo. And recently, speaking exclusively to us, Horner said he had been amazed at how badly the move has worked out, and he insisted Ricciardo is better than he's showing. So the indication is that Red Bull, or certainly Horner, thinks what Ricciardo has done at McLaren is an anomaly. Let's be honest, if Ricciardo was to step in for Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez and perform at the average level he has at McLaren, that would be underwhelming. But there is a belief within Red Bull that in the right environment, with a good car, Ricciardo can be the high-quality driver he was before McLaren. And that's a different proposition entirely. Then he becomes a stunning reserve option and potentially more. If Horner's right that the real Daniel Ricciardo is still capable of much more than we've seen at McLaren, then every other team on the grid will be watching closely next year for signs that he can rediscover his spark. But it might be hard to spot from a distance, particularly if his time in contemporary F1 machinery is limited or even non-existent. As for Red Bull, the marketing side of this reunion makes sense for both parties. Horner knows Ricciardo is still one of the biggest names and one of the biggest characters in F1. So Red Bull gets a very popular driver to roll out at demonstrations and various activities, boosting its work in a lot of important markets. And this fits with what Ricciardo wants. He'll be well compensated for a role that won't be quite as demanding as a full-on reserve driver position, and he gets to do some fun stuff while keeping close to the grind in F1. Being involved in a top team should keep him sharp too. As he put it, there are a lot of potential positives to going to his old home. That includes benefiting from a bit of familiarity. And though it might sound weird, Ricciardo genuinely doesn't want to race next year, at least in the midfield. He needs a break. Even when we chatted to him briefly just before he walked out of the paddock for the last time in 2022, he had the air of someone who was ready for a massive F1 detox. He's spoken of this year being more difficult than his first season at McLaren, the potential slog of 24 races next year, wanting a fresh approach, and even hinting that he might not be the best version of himself without taking a break. Okay, let's get to the elephant in the room. Rejoining Red Bull raises the question of whether Ricciardo has a chance of a race seat there in the near future. Ostensibly, there is no availability at Red Bull before 2025. Replacing Verstappen is a no-go, not least because he has a valid contract until the end of 2028. And Perez signed a contract extension to the end of 2024 earlier this year. So the only route to Ricciardo racing for Red Bull would be for either Verstappen or Perez to leave, whether they jump or are pushed. When asked by us if Ricciardo could become an option for a race seat at Red Bull, should he prove to the team he can be as good as he was when he was last there in 2018, team boss Horner quickly shut the prospect down. In fact, he shut it down so quickly, it almost made you think that there was definitely something in it. However, that was probably just a reflex reaction to what's been a difficult week for Red Bull. As for Ricciardo, he has said all along that whatever he does in 2023 has to get him in the best position to return to F1 in 2024. That doesn't necessarily have to be with Red Bull, maybe that's not even his goal. But while Horner tried to rule Ricciardo out of a future race seat, Ricciardo himself didn't. And even if the team doesn't admit it publicly, it's in Red Bull's interest to entertain the possibility. When the negotiations with Ricciardo started, Red Bull may well have had zero intention or even reason to consider him as an alternative to Perez, even though Perez's own form wasn't great when Ricciardo's McLaren exit was confirmed. Since then, though, things have changed. Internal tensions have recently surfaced over Perez allegedly crashing deliberately during qualifying for the Monaco Grand Prix, leading to a team orders row months later in Brazil. Verstappen's refusal to help Perez in Brazil was retribution for an incident earlier in the season, believed to be that qualifying crash, and the belief it was intentional to help Perez beat Verstappen. Max Verstappen says that things are all square there now, but we understand there was serious tension behind the scenes at Red Bull between Brazil and Abu Dhabi. Now the theory in the F1 paddock is that Ricciardo has either been targeted as a more harmonious option to soothe the Verstappen camp, or Red Bull could use the hypothetical threat of turning to Ricciardo as a weapon to keep Perez in line. Perez joined Red Bull in 2021 and has won 3 races for the team. He also played his part in Red Bull's first Constructors' Championship success since 2013. But if there is any hint of a disturbed peace internally, then his performance level alone will not be enough to save him, not in Verstappen's team, given Perez is having to play second fiddle. So the bottom line is, it doesn't matter if Ricciardo's a long way from being seriously considered for a Red Bull race seat again. The very fact he's rejoining and will be part of the team makes him a key part of the driver lineup narrative in 2023, unless Perez makes a cast iron case on track and off it that he's still the best option.